We are back in a Gen 4 LS L94 6.2, and I say back because we've been doing a lot of LT swaps lately. The first swap I ever did was an LS 5.3, and the second swap was an LS L9H. That was back in 2009. The L94 hadn't been released yet. The L94 and the L9H are essentially the same engine. The difference is the active fuel management. A lot of guys prefer the L9H because if you want to mod the engine, put a cam in it, whatever, it's a little bit easier not having the active fuel management parts. But the L94 became pretty much the standard 6.2 SUV engine for about 5 years. From 2010 to 2014, GM ran this engine right across the half-ton truck and SUV line, Escalades, Silverados, Sierras, Denales, and there was good reason for that. This engine had good power, it was flex fuel capable, it had variable valve timing, all aluminum construction. It just had all the technology that they could put into the Gen 4, and it did a good job. There were some teething issues in the early days of the L92 in 2007, 2008, and then in 2009 the L9H was released, and then of course in 2010 the L94 came out, and it had all the whistles and bells. We've done lots of these swaps. I want to say hundreds. I don't know the exact number, but I know there's a lot of them out there. And that second vehicle that we did was my personal JK over a decade ago. And it has the L9H with about 80, I think I'm at 88,000 miles, and it's been a bulletproof engine for me. If you got into an L9H or an L94 after getting out of a V6, you would just say, wow, what a huge improvement in drivability. And let's not forget the transmission. A lot of guys forget how much the transmission plays a part in drivability, and the 6L80 is an excellent transmission. I still get complaints from guys with the JKs and the 5-speeds, even with the hybrid conversions where they're running a 5-speed behind an LS, that it just doesn't shift as well as the GM transmissions. And I think we can all agree that the GM Hydramatics have been excellent transmissions throughout the years. They've been used by Rolls-Royce and other European companies. They're top of the line when it comes to transmissions. I've been a little spoiled driving these LTs around, whether they're a 5.3 or a 6.2 or an LT4. And by the way, we got another LT4 coming up soon and an LT5. So I got used to that tremendous bottom end torque. Now, this engine just downshifted, and it's not like we're struggling, but we went from 6th to 5th going up this grade, where an LT probably wouldn't have. An LT probably would have held this gear. This engine has more horsepower on the top. I'm going to say that this engine, the way we got it tuned, is putting out about 430 horsepower, and that comes out to about 300 to 330 horsepower at the rear wheels. A lot of guys say, wow, you lost 100 horsepower through the drivetrain. Yes, you do. You got to remember, this is a four-wheel drive vehicle going through a transfer case, the transmission, the drive shaft joints, and all that. Especially with oversized tires, you're probably going to end up losing about 100 horsepower. 300 horsepower at the rear wheels is really nothing to sneeze at. If you consider an early JK is 202 horsepower and you lose 100 horsepower, you're putting out barely 100 horsepower at the rear wheels. So we're almost tripling that. And that's where these LS engines shine, is with horsepower. They're like a Hemi or a small block Chevy where they build power on the top end. The larger displacement you go, the more torque you have in the bottom end. And that's what makes the 6.2 desirable, is it's got the cubic inches to have the bottom end torque, but then it's got the horsepower on the top. If you look at a 5.3 LS, it's got pretty decent horsepower on the top, but it doesn't have the low-end pulling power of the larger displacement engines like the 6.0 and the 6.2. So for a long time, the 6.2 LS was really the standard if you wanted a performance engine in your JK, and it still makes sense. So what you got with the LS 6.2 is good bottom-end torque. Of course, it's not the same as an LT, but combined with the 6L80 transmission and a 4-to-1 first gear, you could launch a JK in 40s with no problem. And then of course you had that 0.66 overdrive on top, so you cruise at low RPM. And there's not a whole lot to say in this video about this engine because it's been covered in previous videos many times. So I think what I'm going to do is gear this video towards you guys trying to decide on which way to go, Gen 5 or Gen 4. And here's the reality in the LS market. GM pretty much obsoleted most of the LS engines, and that includes most of the truck engines, including the 5.3 and the 6.2s. The 6-liter is a little bit different, I'll explain that in a minute. But these truck SUV engines really went out of mainstream production in about 2014. GM did continue to make the 5.3 for a little while for the E-Rod package, but even that's gone now. So it's getting more difficult to source a 5.3 or 6.2 LS truck engine. GM did keep the LS3 in production. So if you want a 6.2 today, the odds are, or at least a new 6.2, the odds are you're going to get an LS3. The LS3 is basically this engine stripped down. It has no VVT, it has no AFM, it's slightly higher compression at 10.7 to 1, puts out good top end horsepower, puts out decent bottom end horsepower, but the LS3 was really about performance. So the cam and the tune is really set up for higher RPM. It makes an excellent engine in a JK, we've done a lot of them, and if you want to get a new 6.2, you're probably going to end up getting an LS3. But here's the nut. The new LS3 is just over $7,000, somewhere between $7,000 and $8,000, depending on what variant you get. And yes, there are variants with different cams and intakes and such. Now, if you consider the new LT1 has dropped price, and we're talking in the $8,000 range, you're paying almost as much for an LT1 as you are for an LS3. And the LT1 is 11.5 to 1 compression, direct injected, blah, blah, blah. On top of that, the LT1 can run the 8-speed or the 10-speed transmission. I am very impressed with the 10L80 transmission. Unlike the 8L90 where we had to fight it at the beginning, the 10L80 is pretty much a bolt in and drive away, and that makes our job a lot easier. GM really spent a lot of time and did their diligence on the 10L80, just like they did on the LT cylinder heads. The 8L90 has matured into an excellent transmission, so don't be disappointed if you find a combination with that. So there is an obvious answer, and that is just to move into the LT. But a lot of you guys want to run the LS. You want the simplicity of the LS. You have an early JK. We have a California executive order on the LS. There's still legitimate reasons to run the LS, and there's not a whole lot of reasons not to. When you look at the engine conversion world, while the LT is top of the line in my opinion, especially with the high gear transmissions, the LS is no slouch. You can put it up against a Hemi or a supercharged V6 or anything else you want. In my opinion, this customer has no regrets not going with the LT. He saved money, he got a brand new crate motor. This engine runs excellent and is going to run excellent for hundreds of thousands of miles if it's taken care of. It has great performance, it cruises on the highway, and yes, while the LT does have some advantages here and there, in a Jeep like this that's going to go out and get wheeled, in fact I think this guy's going to the Rubicon, in a Jeep like this where the guy's going to go out and wheel it pretty hard, he's not really concerned about getting that extra couple of tenths of a mile to the gallon fuel economy. So I've said in my previous videos, we're in that transitional state. We're seeing these engines phased out, but they still make good candidates for an LS swap. You got to remember that if you've got an earlier Jeep, even a 2012-13, that's when these engines were being made, and they match the Jeep perfectly. So you got about 75-80 horsepower more with this engine than the LT 5.3, and you're running about the same price. The 6L80 is dialed in, it shifts like a dream, you got tap shift, off-road it's amazing. There is one more option I want to talk about because I don't want this video to get too long, and that's the 6-liter LS. The 6-liter LS has been around a long time. It evolved into the L96. In around 2014, when GM didn't have a heavy-duty truck motor in the Gen 5 lineup, they continued to use the L96. They fitted it with Gen 5 electronics, a Gen 5 computer, but it's still essentially the same engine minus the throttle body. So if you put a throttle body on it from a Gen 4, you can still get the 6-liter new in a crate from GM. And it's very similar to this engine. It does not have AFM. It does have an iron block. It's got slightly lower compression so it can run the regular gas, but it's a powerful engine. It has a lot of torque and it's available new. One downside to the LS 6.0 is it is a heavy-duty truck engine. So please check your local emissions rules to make sure that it's compliant in your area. There was just something special about the all-aluminum, higher compression 6.2 liter. For a lot of years it carried the torch. So we're going to take this L94 6-speed to the mountain. Been there many times before with this powertrain. Know it like the back of my hand. And we'll see you in the next video.